first, let's start with the top 50. All of our picks for those awards, I assume, will be in this top 50, but there were a couple snubs. Notable things to mention are 30 in a row. Zach Collaros is number 1, where I had him. Brady Oliveira, highest Canadian since John Cornish at 2. I also had him as my highest Canadian, but at 3. But let's talk about the people who feel a type of way today. Who in your mind was a snub, and who on the list do you feel is there, but it's still not getting the respect that they deserve, is too low? So for me, the biggest outright snub is Tavares Daniels. He's the number 1 receiver, was the number 1 receiver on the best offense in the league a year ago, had a breakout year, but even before that, it's just been incredibly consistent. How do you mean this guy's not one of the top 50 players in the league? But the guys on the list who I felt should have been higher play the same position. And I think it's a disrespect to the position. It's Beverett at 22, Jamal Peters at 26. Both of those guys can change a game by themselves very differently, but both do. Both strike fear in their opponent. Both you have to game plan for. But also, I would argue, the toughest position to play in the CFL outside of quarterback is defensive back. You're dealing with the waggle. You're dealing with the size of the field. You're dealing with different coverages. You're dealing with the fact that you need to be in great cardiovascular shape because the play clock is so short. You're essentially doing gassers and wind sprints over and over and over again. Plus, in our game, to be a DB, you have to factor in the run game as well. The fact that these guys are in the mid-20s when I'd argue they're among, if not the best players on their teams at the hardest position in the sport, those guys need to be higher. But who jumped out for you as snubs and people who were on the list but not high enough?
I got Tavares Daniels on my list as a snub. Absolutely. Again, you talk about the fact that he's been on a great offense. And I think probably being on an offense that did so well last year and didn't necessarily have to play as much as he could have to pad his stats, maybe that played a factor into that, but I still think he should have been recognized. That's my guy on top of that. So Tavares definitely should have been on there. I got a couple of guys rushing up the end that I feel should have had more love. But hey, look, I understand. It's an offensive world. So you guys, I said you guys always look at the offense.
Wait, did I just say my
you did
my two guys who need to be higher? Don't they play defense?
Generally speaking, you guys always look at the
Generally
offense.
speaking, we could generally go back to last week when
You're
I had more
still
defenders in my top 10 than you did.
You're still an offensive guy at heart. But I got a couple of guys that rush off the edge. I got Lorenzo Malden, who I truly believe is still a game changer, affects every single game that he plays. Mind you, maybe his injuries and ailments throughout the season, cost him quite a bit, but I still believe he should be on there. And the other name DB that I truly believe belongs on the list, should have been on the list because of the playmaker that he is. He's got a new home in 24, Dominique Rhymes. He's a guy that can put numbers. He's a guy that when you play defense, you got to know exactly where he is. Dominique Rhymes is going to have a huge season this year, and he is probably going to prove a lot of people wrong and going to say that he does belong on this list. Here's the name, in my opinion, that I think should have been a little bit higher. Cam Judge. Put him at 25. I think, in my opinion, he belongs a little bit higher. Yes, the performance of the Calgary Stampeders wasn't necessarily top tier, but when you look at Cam Judge, the amount of turnovers that he created, the amount of impact that he had as a defensive player and tackles, and he just filled up every stats on the sheet. And to me, in my opinion, 25 is a little too low for a guy like Cam Judge.